So today we're looking at the OnePlus One, the phone that describes itself as the flagship killer. Can it compete even though it's a year on since its release? Let's have a look. So the OnePlus One is quite a strange phone as far as marketing goes, because when it was released back in April in 2014, it was a invite-only release. So if somebody wanted to buy it, they had to be invited to buy it because it was such a limited stock. Now a year on, it's only now in Ireland, once they released a number of stores in Europe, that you can now go online and buy one wholesale. So the first thing you'll notice is the operating system. It's a Oxygen OS, which is their own operating system. Now you'll notice it's quite similar enough to Android stock Lollipop, but it's got its own few tweaks and changes, that kind of thing. From what I found once it updated, because it's an older phone, so it needed to be updated once I got it, was that it still required a bit of tweaking. Now, from what I could see, like the themes were off, like even around the apps, it was all blocky and not very aesthetic. And even stuff like connection issues I was finding, which a quick Google found that there's different settings that for some reason are set as default that needed to be changed. But once you start tweaking with it and getting it right, it does work exactly like Lollipop. So it may be a big phone, but it also has big interior in terms of processing speed. It's got a 2.5 gigahertz processor, 3 gigs of RAM, and it's got either 16 or 64 gig hard drive, which is pretty impressive when you compare it to, say, like Samsung Galaxy S6, which is pretty equal in terms of spec. And as well in terms of the camera, from what I played around with it, it's a 13 megapixel camera with 6 individual lenses, which they promise gives a pretty clear picture. And from what I can see, the photos that I've taken, it's multiple settings. So you've got more settings than you could deal with. Like, it's almost Instagram. It's like Instagram on your phone without needing to go through all those settings. It's got everything else as well in terms of, say, NFC tags for eventual Android Pay. And then it's also got your usual connectivity issues. It's got LTE, so or 4G to you and me, 3G, everything like that. Although I did find there were some issues when it comes to going into, say, an underground car park and then coming out of it again. There was issues where it couldn't seem to find the connection once again, and it would be better to put it into airplane mode. So the screen is 5.5 inches. It's Gorilla Glass, but I've found from playing around with it that the screen still manages to get kind of smudged for prolonged use. It almost kind of requires regular cleaning. As well, the auto adjust, I just find that when you go into a bright room, it takes a good 10 seconds at least, if not more. And sometimes I've had to adjust manually to get it up to speed. Whereas, other phones, say like the iPhone 6, will be almost instantaneous when you walk into a room. So what I do have to criticize, to be honest, is how it looks. Now, I mean, it's a cheap enough phone, which we'll get to later in terms of price. But what I find is there's a lot of unnecessary kind of basicness to it. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any thought in it. Like around here, you have these kind of bezeled, like grooves here, which seem to do nothing but just collect dirt. And again, it just seems to be kind of closed together as well down at the bottom. But more importantly, for functionality's sake, the volume and power buttons are just way too unpronounced. Like here, it's probably difficult to see, but you can almost barely see the buttons here, which I found when holding in one hand, I'm not sure whether I'm actually turning the volume up or down just from looking at it. Likewise with the power button. What I will say though is that I do like the back, which is kind of like the sandpapery feel, which it does feel pretty good in the hand, and it means it doesn't slip, which some phones in the market tend to, if you put it on the table, it doesn't take much for it to slip off. So what do I think of it? Well, I think it's pretty impressive considering when you buy it online, which is the only place you can buy it, it's €349 for the 16 gigabyte version, or $399 for the 64 gigabyte. Now, at the moment, at the time of recording, they do these kind of flash sales and stuff like that. So it's $249 for the 16 gigabyte, which is, when you consider that a SIM-free iPhone 6 or Samsung Galaxy S6 would set you back €800, €900, this still brings you pretty close to that kind of performance. So if you're willing to buy this, I would recommend that you put a bit of time into tweaking it and getting it just right, and then you can get a great phone for a very reasonable price. So there we have it, the OnePlus One.